Welcome to Her Golden Years Stories. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from today. I want to know how far my story reaches. I sacrificed every penny I owned to build my sons a multi-million-dollar empire across the ocean. I trusted my youngest boy to watch over my quiet retirement. But when I showed up to celebrate their success, they handed me a catering badge and told the press I was just the cleaning lady. Tonight they think they left me homeless and broken on the street. They have no idea what I am about to do. My name is Vivian Hayes. I am 68 years old. For 30 years, I walked the polished hallways of a suburban Seattle high school as a public school administrator. It was exhausting work managing tight budgets and mediating endless disputes. But I did it with a smile. I did it because my late husband Richard and I had a dream. We wanted our 3 boys to have the world at their fingertips. When Richard passed away a decade ago from a sudden heart attack, he left me with a paid-off duplex and a substantial retirement fund. I could have retired in peace. I could have traveled the country or tended to a beautiful garden. Instead, when my 2 oldest sons, Colin and Bradley, came to me with a massive vision for a tech startup in Europe, I did what any devoted mother would do. I wrote the check. I drained my life savings. I cashed out Richard's retirement accounts. I gave them the financial foundation to build their empire overseas. I kept only my duplex and my modest pension, leaving my youngest son, Travis, nearby. Travis promised to manage my local affairs, to help me with the property taxes, to be my anchor, while his brothers conquered the world. I trusted him with my life. Fast forward 5 years to tonight. Tonight was supposed to be the ultimate vindication of my sacrifice. Colin and Bradley were returning to Seattle to open their brand new North American headquarters. They were hosting a lavish corporate gala downtown. For weeks I prepared. I bought a beautiful navy blue dress. I spent my tight budget at the salon because I wanted my boys to look at me and feel proud. I arrived at the grand ballroom an hour early, my heart racing with anticipation. The street was lined with valet drivers and flashing cameras. Local politicians and wealthy investors mingled under the crystal chandeliers. I walked toward the main entrance, ready for the tears, the tight hugs, the joyful reunion. I was ready to be the proud mother of the hour. But before my foot even touched the red carpet, a hand clamped down hard on my arm. I was yanked sharply into a dim side corridor near the kitchen access. It was Travis, my youngest son. He was wearing an immaculate designer tuxedo, but his face was twisted in a scowl of pure irritation. Before I could even say his name, he shoved a cheap plastic lanyard against my chest. I looked down. The badge read, "Catering Staff." "Travis, what is this?" I asked, my voice trembling with confusion. "I am your mother." Travis looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "We need to keep things organized tonight, Mum. Take the badge and go around the back to the service elevator. The catering crew is short-handed, and you are in the way here." A heavy block of ice settled in my stomach. The service elevator, the catering crew. I stared at the boy I had cooked thousands of meals for, trying to find a trace of love in his face. There was none. Before I could demand an explanation, a massive wave of noise erupted from the main lobby. Colin and Bradley were making their grand entrance. They were surrounded by flashing cameras, reporters, and wealthy elites. They looked so confident, so powerful in their tailored suits. My heart leaped instinctively. I stepped out from the dim corridor into the light of the lobby, ignoring Travis. I raised my hand. "Colin. Bradley." I called their names. For one brief, terrifying second, the crowd parted. My 2 oldest sons looked directly at me. Our eyes met. I waited for the smiles. I waited for them to rush forward. Instead, their faces turned to stone, They did not slow down. They kept walking. A reporter holding a microphone noticed the awkward pause. He pointed at me standing there in my simple navy dress, holding a catering badge. "Who is she?" the reporter asked. Colin did not hesitate. He did not blink. He looked at the cameras with his perfect, polished smile and said, "Just the woman who used to clean our old office. Please keep the catering staff away from the press line." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. The cleaning woman. Not mother, not family, not even my name. The entire lobby seemed to spin. I could not breathe. The flashing lights blurred into a painful white haze. My sons, the boys I had sold my future to support, walked into the grand ballroom and let the heavy oak doors swing shut behind them. I was erased, completely and totally erased from their story. Before I could recover from the shock, Travis grabbed my arm again, his grip bruising my skin. He dragged me deeper into the service hallway, away from the music and the lights. He pushed me against the concrete wall. "You just could not follow simple instructions, could you?" he hissed. I stood there gasping for air, the tears finally spilling over my cheeks. "Travis, how could you let them say that I sobbed? I gave you boys everything. I am your mother." A sharp, mocking laugh echoed down the corridor. Chloe, Travis's wife, stepped out of the shadows. She was draped in a stunning emerald gown, diamonds glittering at her neck. "Oh, please spare us the dramatic tragedy act," Vivian Chloe sneered. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of undisguised disgust. "Look at you. You smell like mothballs and desperation. You really thought you were going to walk into a room full of billionaires wearing that pathetic thrift store rag. You are an embarrassment." The venom in her voice paralyzed me. For years I had welcomed Chloe into my home. I cooked her favorite roast on Sundays. I bought her thoughtful gifts. Now she was looking at me like I was a cockroach on her pristine shoe. I looked at Travis, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife to stop. But Travis just adjusted his expensive cuffs. "Chloe is right, Mum. You do not fit in our world anymore. You are a liability. A liability." The word tasted like poison. I wiped my face, a sudden surge of anger cutting through my grief. "I am leaving," I declared, straightening my spine. "I am going back to my house. I do not want to see any of you ever again." I turned to walk toward the exit, but Travis stepped in my path. His smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "What house, Mum?" he asked softly. I stopped cold. "My duplex. My home. The home your father and I bought 30 years ago." Travis let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You do not have a home anymore, Mum. The duplex was foreclosed on yesterday morning." The floor vanished beneath my feet. I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. "Foreclosed. That is impossible. I own that house. I gave you the money to pay the property taxes every single year." "You did give me the money," Travis agreed calmly. "And I spent it. The taxes have not been paid in 4 years. The bank took it back. You cannot go back there. The locks have already been changed." I felt a scream rising in my throat, but terror choked it down. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" Chloe stepped forward, practically purring with satisfaction. "Because we needed to upgrade our lifestyle, Vivian. Travis deserves to live like his brothers. We deserve the best. And frankly, you were just taking up space." Travis reached into the dark corner of the hallway and pulled out a cheap, battered vinyl suitcase. He dropped it at my feet. "I packed your essentials," he said. "Just some clothes and your basic toiletries." He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a glossy, folded brochure. He slapped it against my chest. "This is for the Sunny Pines Assisted Living Facility on the east side of town. It is state-funded. It is cheap. And a bed opens up next week. I suggest you find a shelter until then." I looked at the brochure. Sunny Pines was a notoriously run-down, horrific place where the city abandoned its most forgotten people. "You cannot do this," I gasped, my entire body shaking. "The law will not let you throw me on the street. I am perfectly capable of fighting this." Travis leaned in close, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Oh, but you cannot fight it, Mum. You see, I already took care of the legal paperwork. I filed an emergency petition claiming you are suffering from severe cognitive decline. I told the courts you're a danger to yourself. If you try to cause a scene, if you try to call the police, I will simply show them the medical reports I am having a doctor draft up right now. They will lock you in a psychiatric ward before morning. Enjoy the rain, Mum." With that, Travis and Chloe turned their backs on me. They walked back through the heavy doors into the warmth and music of the gala, leaving me entirely alone. I stumbled out the service exit into the cold, harsh Seattle night. A freezing rain had begun to fall, soaking my hair and my ruined navy dress. I stood in the dark alley next to the dumpsters, clutching the cheap vinyl suitcase and the brochure for a nursing home. I was 68 years old. I was penniless. I was homeless. The family I had sacrificed my entire life to build had thrown me away like garbage so they could drink champagne. I stood in the rain for a long time, letting the cold water wash over my face. The tears stopped. The sorrow vanished. A dark, absolute clarity took its place in my mind. They thought I was just a weak, senile old woman who would quietly fade away into the shadows. They thought they had stripped me of all my power. But as I gripped the handle of that cheap suitcase, a new fire ignited in my chest. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had woken up the wrong woman. And I was going to make them pay for every single tear. The rain beat relentlessly against the thin glass of the cheap motel window. I sat perfectly still on the edge of a sagging mattress. My damp navy blue dress clung to my skin, a miserable reminder of the gala, and the sons who had looked right through me. The cheap vinyl suitcase Travis had tossed at my feet sat unopened on the stained carpet. I opened my purse and counted exactly $42 in crumpled bills. A woman of 68 should not have to count pocket change to figure out if she can afford a hot meal. But I did not feel hungry. I only felt a cold, hard anger taking root deep inside my chest. I needed money. I needed resources to survive the week. And then a memory pierced through the shock. 10 years ago, shortly after my husband Richard passed away, I rented a small climate-controlled storage unit on the industrial edge of town. I used it to keep Richard's old office files, his life insurance paperwork, and family heirlooms I could not bear to part with. Travis knew about the unit. 6 months ago, he insisted on clearing out the attic of my duplex, claiming the clutter was a fire hazard. He packed up dozens of cardboard boxes and told me he was taking them to the storage facility for safekeeping. I realized now he was just emptying my home to prepare for his fraudulent foreclosure scheme. I prayed Richard's old life insurance binders were still in those boxes. I thought there might be a forgotten savings bond or an old account number I could use to secure a small loan. I paid a taxi driver with almost all my remaining cash. The storage facility was completely deserted in the grey morning fog. I punched my security code into the keypad, my fingers stiff and numb from the biting cold. The heavy metal door groaned loudly as I rolled it up. Inside, illuminated by a single flickering overhead bulb, were stacks of brown cardboard boxes. They were the remnants of a life Travis had forcefully dismantled. I pushed past an old armchair and started tearing open the boxes. I desperately searched for the heavy leather binders Richard always kept his financial documents inside. I opened a large box labeled "Office Junk" in Travis's sloppy handwriting. But when I pulled back the packing tape, I did not find Richard's old files. I found hundreds of thick, unopened envelopes. My heart skipped a beat. I reached into the box and pulled out a handful of mail. The return addresses were stamped from London, Paris, and Berlin. They were all from Colin and Bradley. My hands trembled violently as I tore open the first envelope. It was dated 4 years ago. The letter inside was written on expensive, heavy paper. Mum, the letter began. We are so incredibly confused. Travis told us you threw away the first-class plane tickets we sent for your birthday. He said you never wanted to see us again because we abandoned you to build our business. Please tell us what we did wrong. We love you. We miss you so much. I gasped for air. I ripped open another envelope and then another. They were all exactly the same. Letters begging for my forgiveness. Letters pleading for a simple phone call. And then at the bottom of the box I found the financial documents. Travis had carelessly stuffed banking statements and intercepted mail into this hidden box to conceal his tracks. I found thick stacks of returned checks. I stared at the numbers printed on the paper. They were massive corporate dividend payouts meant for me. Travis had forged my signature on rejection letters, sending back small checks to make it look like I was bitterly refusing their wealth. But buried beneath those fake rejection letters were the wire transfer receipts. Colin and Bradley had not abandoned me. They had been sending hundreds of thousands of dollars every single quarter to ensure I lived in absolute luxury. They routed the money directly into the joint account Travis managed for my daily expenses. I stared at the bank routing numbers with wide eyes. Travis had intercepted every single dime. He drained those accounts the moment the overseas wires cleared. He funneled the millions into his own private corporate accounts. The same accounts Chloe used to buy her diamond necklaces and designer gowns. The sheer gravity of the betrayal hit me so hard, my knees gave out. I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor of the storage unit. My beautiful, brilliant boys had never forgotten me. They had been desperately trying to reach me for 5 years. Travis had built a massive, impenetrable wall of lies between us. He told me they were too busy and too arrogant to call a public school administrator. He told them I was a bitter, resentful old woman who hated them for moving away. He played both sides with terrifying perfection. He isolated me completely, making me believe he was the only son who cared, while he systematically stole the millions my older sons were sending to protect me. I sat in the dim light, surrounded by the physical proof of my destroyed family. I picked up a letter from Colin announcing the birth of his first daughter, my granddaughter, a child I never knew existed. Travis told us you tore up the baby pictures Colin had written. The blue ink was smeared as if a heavy tear had fallen on the page. I do not understand this anger, Mum, but I will keep sending the support money to Travis so he can take care of your medical needs. I'm so sorry I failed you. I clutched the letter to my chest and let out a sob that echoed off the cold metal walls. Travis had stolen my money. He had stolen my home. He had stolen my dignity. But worst of all, he had stolen my family. He had stolen my chance to hold my granddaughter. Every luxury car Travis drove, every tailored tuxedo he wore to that gala, was paid for by the brothers he had alienated me from. And last night, when Colin looked at me with such cold, dead eyes in the lobby, it was not out of arrogance. It was the result of 5 years of manufactured heartbreak. He thought I was a monster. He thought I had cruelly rejected his love and his children. The tears stopped falling. A sudden terrifying calm washed over my entire body. I carefully gathered every single letter, every bank statement, every forged rejection note. I placed them gently into my purse. Travis thought he had burned every bridge I had. He thought dumping these boxes in a forgotten storage unit would keep his dark secrets buried forever. He thought I was just a helpless widow who would quietly accept her miserable fate in a state-run nursing home. But he forgot one crucial detail. A mother's love is a powerful thing, but a mother's righteous fury is absolutely unstoppable. I left the storage unit with the letters from my older sons burning a hole in my purse. I did not go back to that cheap, damp motel room. I drove my beat-up sedan straight downtown toward the county municipal building. The freezing Seattle rain lashed against my windshield, but the cold inside my car was nothing compared to the ice in my veins. Travis had told me my home was gone. He told me the bank had foreclosed on the duplex because the property taxes had not been paid in 4 years. I needed to see the official records with my own 2 eyes. I needed to know exactly how a house I owned free and clear had been ripped away from me without a single warning notice arriving in my mailbox. I walked into the county clerk office, ignoring the ache in my knees. The building smelled of wet wool coats and stale coffee. I approached the property records desk and handed my driver license to a young clerk with thick framed glasses. I told him I needed the complete deed history and any foreclosure records associated with my address for the past 5 years. The young man typed my information into his computer. He frowned, clicking his mouse a few times before looking back up at me. There is no foreclosure on record for this property, the clerk said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. The property taxes have been paid in full every single year. My heart skipped a heavy beat. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. What do you mean there is no foreclosure? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My son told me the bank took the house yesterday morning. The clerk shook his head and turned his monitor slightly so I could see the screen. No bank took this house. The property was legally transferred out of your name exactly 8 months ago. A quitclaim deed was filed and approved. You signed the property over entirely to a private holding company. I asked him to print the documents immediately. When he handed me the heavy stack of warm paper, my hands shook. I turned to the second page and stared at the signature line. There was my name, Vivian Hayes, written in black ink. But as a former school administrator who had reviewed thousands of forged hall passes and permission slips, I knew my own handwriting. The loops were too sharp. The pressure of the pen was too aggressive. Travis had forged my signature. Then I looked at the date. 8 months ago. That was the exact same week I had been bedridden with a terrible bout of pneumonia. Travis had played the role of the doting son perfectly. He brought me hot soup, fluffed my pillows, and handed me a thick stack of medical insurance forms, insisting I needed to sign them quickly to cover my prescriptions. He had slipped a property transfer right into the middle of my medical paperwork. I looked at the name of the new property owner. It was an entity called Emerald Crest Holdings, LLC. The breath was knocked right out of my lungs. I recognized that name immediately. It was the boutique luxury event planning company Chloe had bragged about starting last year. Travis did not lose my home to the county. He literally stole the 30-year legacy Richard and I built and gifted it to his greedy wife so she could use my duplex as collateral for her failing vanity business. The depth of the betrayal made me physically sick. But I could not stop there. The intercepted letters in my purse proved Colin and Bradley had been sending money. I needed to know exactly how much they had sent and where every single penny had gone. I left the clerk office and drove straight to my primary bank branch. I walked past the tellers and demanded to see the branch manager, a man named Mr. Higgins, who had known Richard and me for 2 decades. I marched into his glass-walled office, sat in his leather chair, and placed my identification flat on his desk. I told him I needed a complete, unredacted transaction history of the joint account I shared with Travis for the past 5 years. Mr. Higgins looked incredibly nervous. He shifted in his seat and refused to meet my eyes. "Vivian," he stammered. "Travis usually handles these requests for you. He told us your memory has been slipping lately and asked us to call him if you ever came in confused." "Should I give him a quick call?" I slammed my hand flat against his mahogany desk. The loud smack made him jump. "Mr. Higgins," I said, my voice projecting the absolute authority of a woman who had managed hundreds of unruly high school students. My mind is sharper than it has ever been. If you dial that phone and alert my son, my next call will be to the federal authorities to report this branch for banking fraud. Print the statements right now. He swallowed hard, his face turning pale, and hurried over to his printer. 10 minutes later, he placed a stack of papers thicker than a phone directory in front of me. I put on my reading glasses and began flipping through the pages. What I saw on those lines completely shattered whatever remaining illusion I had about my youngest child. Every single quarter for the past 5 years, a massive international wire transfer had hit that joint account. The sender was a corporate entity tied directly to Colin and Bradley's tech firm in Europe. The amounts were absolutely staggering. $50,000. $80,000. There was one deposit right before the holidays for over $150,000. My older boys had been sending a fortune to ensure I never had to worry about a single bill for the rest of my life. But the money never stayed in the account for more than 24 hours. I tracked the outgoing transfer lines, dragging my fingernail across the ink. Travis was not just moving the funds into his personal checking account to buy his luxury cars and designer suits. He was routing the money through a highly complex, calculated web of transactions. Large sums were wired directly into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Other massive transfers were funneled into high-yield private investment portfolios listed entirely under his and Chloe's names. I sat in that silent bank office staring at the millions of dollars that had flowed through my name. I remembered how Travis used to sigh heavily and complain to me about the rising cost of my blood pressure medication. I remembered how he made me feel guilty for asking him to buy premium brand cat food for my old tabby. He would tell me money was tight and we needed to stick to a strict budget. He gaslit me into living like a pauper while he was secretly pocketing a massive corporate fortune built by his brothers. Travis had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme right under my nose. He stole my home. He stole my financial security. He stole the loving relationship I should have had with Colin and Bradley. He built a fraudulent, glittering empire on the backs of his own family, leaving me to count pennies and eventually be discarded in a rundown nursing home. I gathered the bank statements and shoved them into my purse alongside the forged deed and the intercepted letters. I had the paper trail, I had the absolute proof, and I knew exactly where I was going next. I did not wait for the morning. I gripped the steering wheel of my rusted sedan and drove straight to the exclusive gated community where Travis and Chloe lived. The freezing rain had finally stopped, but the bitter cold remained deep in my bones. I pulled up to their massive driveway. 2 pristine luxury SUVs sat parked in front of a sprawling, custom-built modern estate with perfectly manicured lawns and giant glass windows. Every brick of that house, every blade of grass, every expensive vehicle was paid for with my stolen security and my older son's stolen money. I marched up the stone steps, ignoring the exhaustion in my legs, and pounded heavily on the custom mahogany door. Travis opened the door wearing a plush cashmere robe, holding a glass of expensive bourbon. His eyes widened in genuine shock when he saw me standing there soaking wet and shivering, but that shock quickly hardened into profound annoyance. "Mum, what on earth are you doing here?" he hissed, looking around nervously to see if any neighbors were watching. "I told you to go to the shelter. You cannot be seen here. I did not ask for permission." I shoved my shoulder hard against the heavy door and pushed past him, marching straight into his grand foyer. The house smelled of expensive candles and roasted meat. Chloe walked out of the designer kitchen swirling a glass of red wine. She stopped in her tracks, her manicured eyebrows pulling together in deep disgust. "Travis, why is she dripping dirty rainwater on our imported rugs?" she sneered. "Tell her to get out before she ruins the hardwood." I did not scream. I did not cry. I reached into my damp purse and pulled out the thick stack of bank statements, the forged quitclaim deed, and the opened letters from Colin and Bradley. I slammed the entire pile down onto their pristine glass coffee table. The heavy thud echoed through the massive house. I know everything I said. My voice was no longer the voice of a broken, homeless widow. It was the voice of a mother demanding justice. I went to the storage unit. I went to the bank. I know about the offshore accounts, Travis. I know you forged my signature to steal my duplex for Chloe's failing business. And I know Colin and Bradley have been sending millions of dollars to take care of me. You intercepted every single dime. You lied to them and you robbed me blind. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw, naked panic flash across Travis's face. His eyes darted down to the bank logos on the papers. He knew he was caught. He knew I held the absolute proof of his federal crimes. But then he looked over at Chloe. Chloe did not panic. She set her wine glass down slowly. She picked up her sleek smartphone from the counter, unlocked the screen, and smiled a smile so evil it made my blood run cold. "What are you doing?" I demanded, stepping toward her. "I am calling the police," Chloe said sweetly, tapping the screen. "Hello, 911. Yes, I need an officer at our residence immediately. We have an intruder. It is my mother-in-law. She has broken into our home. She is severely confused, acting aggressively and shouting bizarre delusions. Yes, she suffers from advanced dementia. We are absolutely terrified for our safety. Please hurry." She hung up the phone and looked at me with triumphant, icy eyes. I lunged forward to grab my papers off the glass table, but Travis blocked my path. The panic in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dark, calculated cruelty. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging viciously into my flesh, bruising my skin. He pulled me close, his face just inches from mine, and whispered his sinister backup plan. "You think you won?" "Mum." "Travis," hissed, his breath hot against my face. "You think those papers mean anything to the police? Look at yourself. You are standing in a multi-million-dollar home, wearing soaking wet, cheap clothes, raving about offshore accounts and stolen mansions. Who do you think they are going to believe? The successful, wealthy businessman, or the hysterical old woman who smells like a dumpster?" I struggled against his grip, but he held me tight. "Let me go," I ordered. "I am not going to let you ruin my life." Travis continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I have been preparing for this exact moment for months. I already hired Dr. Miller, a very expensive and very corrupt private psychiatrist. He has already drafted a 50-page medical report detailing your severe, irreversible cognitive decline. He is willing to testify under oath that you suffer from violent paranoid delusions about your family stealing from you." My heart hammered frantically against my ribs. They were going to use the truth as proof of my insanity. "If you stay here and show those papers to the police," Travis promised, "if you tell a single living soul about the money or the house, I will file an emergency mental incompetency petition tomorrow morning. The courts will strip you of your basic human rights. I will have you locked inside a state psychiatric ward before the weekend. You will never see the sunlight again. And as your legal guardian, I will have total legal control to destroy whatever evidence you think you have." The distant, high-pitched wail of police sirens began to echo through the quiet suburban neighborhood. The flashing red and blue lights would be turning onto their street in a matter of seconds. I looked into the eyes of the boy I had raised, the boy I had comforted through childhood nightmares, the boy I had trusted with my future. I saw nothing but a greedy, ruthless monster willing to lock his own mother in a mental asylum just to protect his stolen wealth. I yanked my arm out of his grip with all the strength I had left. I snatched my documents from the coffee table and shoved them deep into my purse. I could not fight him tonight. If the police walked through that door and found me screaming about stolen millions, they would believe Chloe's frantic phone call. They would put me in a psychiatric hold, and Travis would win. I did not say another word. I turned and ran out the heavy mahogany door, sprinting across the wet lawn. I slipped into the dark shadows of the neighborhood, just as two police cruisers sped up the driveway, their sirens blaring. I hid behind a thick row of hedges, watching from the darkness as Travis and Chloe spoke to the officers, pointing toward the street and playing the role of terrified victims. I waited until the police left to file their report. Then I walked blocks away to where I had hidden my car. I sat in the driver's seat, shivering in the cold, clutching my purse to my chest. Travis thought his threat had paralyzed me with fear. He thought the threat of a psychiatric ward would force me into permanent, terrified silence. But he was wrong. I was not running away to hide. I was running away to prepare for war. I sat, frozen in my car, parked 2 blocks away from Travis and Chloe's luxury estate. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched the red and blue lights of the police cruisers flashing in the distance, reflecting off the wet pavement. Travis had actually done it. He had called the police on his own mother. He was ready to tell them I was a dangerous, delusional old woman. If I had stayed in that house for even 1 more minute, I would be sitting in the back of a squad car, right now, on my way to a locked psychiatric ward. The sheer terror of his threat washed over me. A mental incompetency petition. It was the ultimate weapon. Once a judge signed that order, I would lose every fundamental right I had as a human being. Travis would control my medical care, my finances, my freedom, and my voice. I would be locked away in a white, sterile room, screaming the truth to doctors who were paid to ignore me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The fear tasted like ash in my mouth. But right beneath that fear, the burning embers of my fury began to catch fire. I refused to be a victim. I refused to let the boy I had diapered and fed strip me of my humanity, just so he could fund his lavish lifestyle. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the law, someone powerful enough to fight a corrupt doctor and a greedy son. My mind raced back through the decades of my life. During my 30 years as a public school administrator, I had helped thousands of families navigate crises. I closed my eyes, and a name surfaced from the depths of my memory. Arthur Sterling. 20 years ago, Arthur was a struggling single father whose son was heading down a very dark path. I had spent countless hours in my office, counseling that boy, keeping him out of the juvenile justice system, and helping him get a college scholarship. Arthur had cried in my office the day his son graduated. He had handed me his business card and promised that if I ever needed anything in this world, I only had to call. Today, Arthur Sterling was no longer a struggling father. He was one of the most ruthless, high-powered corporate attorneys in the city of Seattle. I spent the rest of the night parked in the dark corner of a 24-hour diner parking lot, waiting for the sun to rise. I did not sleep a single wink. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I walked through the sliding glass doors of Sterling and Associates. I knew I looked completely out of place in my damp, wrinkled clothes carrying a battered purse, but I walked up to the sleek marble reception desk, with my head held high. I told the receptionist to tell Mr. Sterling that Vivian Hayes was here to collect on a 20-year-old promise. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the inner office swung open. Arthur Sterling stepped out. His hair was silver now, and he wore a suit that probably cost more than my first car, but his eyes held the same warmth I remembered. "Vivian," he said, walking past the stunned receptionist, to take both of my hands. He pulled me into his massive corner office overlooking the Seattle skyline and locked the door behind us. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened my purse and poured the contents onto his immaculate glass desk. I showed him the forged quitclaim deed that stole my home. I showed him the bank statements proving Travis had embezzled millions from the corporate dividends sent by my older sons. I showed him the intercepted letters that proved Colin and Bradley thought I had abandoned them. Finally, I told him about the police at the house and the corrupt doctor Travis was using to file an emergency mental incompetency petition. Arthur sat in silence, reviewing the documents one by one. His face hardened into a mask of pure professional rage. This is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation, Vivian, he said, his voice dangerously low. But the threat of a guardianship petition is the real danger here. If Travis gets a judge to declare you incompetent before we can file fraud charges, he becomes your legal guardian. He can legally drop the charges against himself on your behalf. We have to stop him dead in his tracks. Arthur called in 2 of his top forensic accountants. For the next 3 hours, his office became a war room. They traced the wire transfers, they analyzed the forged signatures, and they began a deep dive into the corporate records of Colin and Bradley's European tech empire. We needed a defense against the medical claims, but Arthur insisted we needed a devastating offense. We needed leverage. Around noon, Arthur let out a sharp gasp. He was staring at his computer screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Vivian," he said, slowly, taking off his reading glasses. "When you gave your sons your life savings and your late husband's retirement funds 5 years ago to start their company, do you remember exactly what you signed?" I shook my head, trying to remember that chaotic time. "I signed a lot of bank transfers," I replied. "I just wanted my boys to have the capital they needed to succeed. I thought I was just giving them a loan." "You did not give them a loan, Vivian," Arthur said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "According to the original articles of incorporation filed with the state, you signed a founding shareholder agreement. Colin and Bradley did not just take your money. They made you an original partner." I stared at him, completely confused. "What does that mean, Arthur? I know Travis forged documents to steal my house and drain my personal bank accounts. He took everything." "He took your personal property," Arthur corrected, leaning across the desk. "But he missed the biggest asset you have. Corporate equity is entirely different from a personal checking account. Transferring founding corporate shares requires extensive biometric verification, secondary legal witnesses, and board approval. Travis could not forge that even if he tried. Vivian, you do not just own a few meaningless shares. You retain a permanent, unassailable 15% voting block in a multi-million-dollar international tech empire. You are a major shareholder." The air rushed out of my lungs. 15%. My boys had not just taken my money and run. They had protected me in the founding documents of their life work, securing my future in the very DNA of their company. Travis had spent 5 years stealing my cash and isolating me, but he was too arrogant and too stupid to look at the actual corporate structure. He thought I was just a discarded mother, living on a fixed income. He had no idea he was messing with a corporate powerhouse. Arthur stood up and smoothed his tie, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the upcoming battle. "Travis thinks he has you backed into a corner with this medical petition," Arthur said, "but he just brought a knife to a nuclear fight. We are not just going to prove you are sane, Vivian. We are going to use your 15% voting block to tear his stolen lifestyle down to the studs." I looked out the massive windows at the city below, feeling a new, incredible strength flowing through my veins. I was no longer the frightened homeless woman shivering in the rain. I was Vivian Hayes, and it was time to reclaim my empire. Arthur Sterling sat across his massive glass desk and looked at me with absolute seriousness. He warned me that Travis would not wait a single day. Travis was desperate and running out of time. He would rush to the county family court the very next morning to file that mental incompetency petition. If a judge granted an emergency guardianship order, Travis would gain total legal control over my life, my medical care, and my money. We had to move much faster than him. We had to build an impenetrable fortress around my mind and my assets. I felt a cold determination settle deep in my bones. I told Arthur to do whatever it takes to stop my son. Arthur immediately called in 2 of his top corporate accountants to conduct a deep dive into the financial records I had salvaged from the storage unit. They spent hours tracing the origins of the corporate dividends Colin and Bradley had been sending me. Right in the middle of their investigation, Arthur let out a sharp gasp. He had discovered a massive legal loophole that Travis completely missed. When I gave my older sons my life savings 5 years ago to start their company, I did not just give them a simple loan. I had signed a founding shareholder agreement. Arthur explained that I did not just own a few meaningless shares. I retained a permanent 15% voting block in Colin and Bradley's multi-million-dollar international tech empire. Travis had spent 5 years stealing my cash and forging documents to steal my personal duplex. But his forged paperwork only covered my personal property. It did not cover my corporate equity. Transferring those founding corporate shares required extensive biometric verification, secondary legal witnesses, and official board approval. Travis could not forge that, even if he tried. He thought I was just a discarded mother living on a fixed income. He had no idea he was messing with a major corporate shareholder. But to protect that massive equity, we had to prove my mind was perfectly intact. Within 2 hours, Arthur scheduled emergency appointments with 3 of the most respected psychiatrists in the city of Seattle. These were top-tier medical professionals who specialized in assessing corporate executives for mental competency. I spent the next 2 grueling days undergoing the most rigorous mental evaluations of my entire life. I sat in bright, sterile clinical rooms while doctors asked me highly complex mathematical questions. They tested my short-term and long-term memory with endless visual puzzles. They had me explain my complete financial history in excruciating detail. It was exhausting to have strangers digging through my mind just because my own child wanted to destroy me. But I answered every single question with absolute clarity. I recalled dates, names, locations, and bank account numbers without a single moment of hesitation. When the final evaluation was complete, the leading psychiatrist handed Arthur her official diagnostic report. She looked at me with deep respect and stated I possessed the cognitive function of a woman 20 years younger. All 3 doctors signed certified notarized affidavits, declaring me completely competent, entirely rational, and fully capable of managing my own personal and financial affairs. They specifically noted that my decision to suspect my son of financial abuse was not a delusion, but a highly logical conclusion based on concrete, verifiable evidence. Travis wanted to paint me as a confused, senile old woman. Instead, I now held bulletproof medical documents that completely destroyed his fraudulent narrative. Proving my sanity was only half the battle. Exposing Travis in family court would stop the guardianship. But we needed to ensure he paid for the millions he had stolen and the forgery he had committed. That is when Arthur made his most aggressive move yet. He called a direct contact he had inside the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 2 federal agents arrived at Arthur's office later that same afternoon. They were serious men who listened carefully as I handed over the stolen bank statements, the forged quitclaim deed to my duplex, and the intercepted letters from Colin and Bradley. I watched the agents trace the massive wire transfers Travis had routed from my joint account into hidden offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They confirmed everything Arthur and I suspected. Travis had committed massive wire fraud, grand larceny, and severe elder financial abuse. The forged property deed alone was a major federal felony. But the agents told us they needed Travis to make a final, irrevocable mistake. They needed him to formally submit his fake medical documents to a judge under oath. If he filed that fraudulent guardianship petition in family court, it would trigger a massive cascade of perjury and fraud charges that he could never escape. Arthur and I looked at each other. The trap was laid out perfectly. We decided to do the hardest thing possible. We decided to do absolutely nothing. We had to let Travis believe he was winning. For the next 3 days, I stayed hidden in a secure, anonymous hotel suite Arthur arranged for me on the other side of the city. I did not answer my phone. I did not try to contact my older sons. I let the heavy silence stretch out, knowing it would make Travis feel powerful and untouchable. Travis always thrived on total control. I knew my sudden disappearance would only accelerate his evil plans. He would assume I was wandering the streets, scared, penniless, and confused. He would assume he had won the game. I sat in that quiet hotel room drinking tea and looking out the window at the Seattle rain. I did not cry anymore. I felt an incredible sense of peace, knowing the truth was finally coming to light. And I was right about my son. On Thursday morning, Arthur called my hotel room. His voice was calm, but I could hear the sharp edge of absolute victory behind his words. Travis had just taken the bait. He had formally filed an emergency petition for temporary legal guardianship in the county family court. He submitted a completely falsified medical report from his corrupt private doctor, claiming I was suffering from severe dementia and required immediate institutionalization for my own safety. The court granted him an emergency hearing for Friday morning. Travis walked right into the snare we had carefully woven. He thought he was about to lock me away in a psychiatric ward and seize my entire fortune without a single fight. He had absolutely no idea he was walking into a courtroom where the federal authorities, 3 top-tier psychiatrists, and the mother he had betrayed were waiting to burn his entire world to the ground. Friday morning arrived with a heavy grey sky pressing down on the city of Seattle. I walked into the county courthouse wearing the exact same navy blue dress I had worn to the corporate gala. It was clean and pressed now, but wearing it was my silent armor. I was not the broken woman they had abandoned in the freezing rain. I walked beside Arthur Sterling, my steps steady and my mind crystal clear. We took our seats at the defense table in the family court division. The room smelled of old wood and stale floor wax. It was a cold and clinical space. It was a room where lives were routinely dismantled, and today my youngest son planned to systematically dismantle mine. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the cool metal of my late husband Richard's wedding band against my skin, drawing strength from his memory. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Travis walked in with Chloe holding tightly to his arm. They looked like they were arriving at an exclusive country club brunch, not a legal hearing to strip a mother of her basic human rights. Travis wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit. Chloe was dressed in a tasteful beige designer dress, clutching a luxury handbag that I knew was paid for with my stolen funds. They strutted down the center aisle, radiating an arrogant and absolute confidence. They did not even glance in my direction. To them, I was already a ghost. I was nothing more than a piece of bothersome paperwork they needed a judge to stamp so they could permanently unlock the rest of my assets. They sat at the petitioner table with their expensive private attorney, whispering to each other and smiling faintly. They truly believed they had already crossed the finish line. A few moments later, the courtroom doors opened again. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Colin and Bradley walked into the room. I had not seen my 2 oldest sons up close in 5 years, not since that fleeting and painful moment at the gala when they walked right past me. Today they looked completely exhausted. They wore dark, conservative suits and carried an air of heavy, unmistakable sorrow. Arthur had legally subpoenaed them, forcing them to fly back to Seattle. But Travis had expertly intercepted the narrative before they ever set foot in the building. Through Arthur's investigators, we knew exactly what Travis had told them. He had spun a tragic and desperate tale. He told his older brothers that the court required their presence to finalize my placement in a specialized high-security medical facility. He told them my mind was completely gone, that I was a danger to myself, and that this hearing was just a sad but necessary family formality. Colin and Bradley sat down in the gallery right behind Travis. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and deep heartbreak. They really believed the lies. They believed the mother who had raised them, who had funded their dreams, was now an empty, broken shell who had cruelly rejected their love. It took every single ounce of my willpower to remain seated and not run across the room to them. I wanted to scream that I loved them, that I had never stopped waiting for them. But Arthur placed a firm, calming hand on my arm. We had to let the play unfold. We had to let Travis dig his grave so deep that he could never climb out. Judge Miller, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. Travis's lawyer stood up first. He began to paint a picture of me that made my stomach turn. But it was when Travis took the witness stand that the true depth of his evil was put on full public display. My youngest son placed his hand on the Bible, swore a sacred oath to tell the truth, and then proceeded to spin a web of the most venomous lies I had ever heard in my life. Travis looked up at the judge with perfectly manufactured tears shimmering in his eyes. He spoke in a soft, trembling voice, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken caretaker. He told the court that it broke his heart to be sitting there today. He claimed my mental state had been rapidly and aggressively deteriorating for years. With a theatrical sigh, he pulled out the thick stack of falsified medical reports he had bought from his corrupt private doctor and submitted them to the court as evidence. He described me as a tragic, senile woman who wandered the streets at night and foolishly squandered her money on imaginary problems. "Your Honor," Travis said, wiping a fake tear from his cheek with absolute precision. "My mother has completely lost her grip on reality. She drained her own bank accounts on paranoid delusions. She forgets where she is. She becomes violent and agitated. She does not even recognize her own family anymore." Travis turned his head and looked sadly at Colin and Bradley sitting in the gallery. "For 5 years, she has adamantly refused to speak to my older brothers." He continued, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. "She threw away their letters. She angrily returned their gifts. Her dementia has made her bitter and completely isolated from the people who love her most. I have tried so hard to care for her locally. I have given up my own time and resources. But I can no longer protect her from herself. She needs to be permanently institutionalized before she seriously hurts herself or someone else." I sat perfectly still, listening to the boy I had diapered and rocked to sleep try to legally bury me alive. Colin lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. Bradley stared at the floor, wiping his eyes. They were mourning the mother they thought they had lost to a terrible disease. Travis stood on the witness stand, soaking in the sympathy of the courtroom, completely confident that his masterful performance had sealed my fate. He thought he had won. He had no idea the trap was about to snap shut. Travis had just finished painting me as a lost, broken woman, wiping a fake tear from his eye as he stepped down from the witness stand. A murmur of pity rippled through the gallery. Then the bailiff called my name. Vivian Hayes. I stood up from my seat next to Mr. Sterling. I did not shuffle. I did not tremble. I did not look like the confused, senile old woman my youngest son had just described to the court. I wore my best tailored charcoal suit, the one I used to wear when I commanded a room full of rowdy high school students and difficult parents. My shoulders were pulled back. My head was held high, and my vision was perfectly clear. The wooden floorboards of the courtroom echoed with the steady, even rhythm of my heels as I walked to the witness box. I placed my right hand on the worn leather cover of the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth, so help me God. When I sat down and adjusted the microphone, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I looked directly at Travis. His smug little smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in his arrogant facade. Travis' private lawyer approached the stand first. He was a slick man in a cheap suit, and he spoke to me in a slow, loud, condescending voice, the exact kind of tone you would use to placate a toddler. The lawyer asked me if I knew where I was right now, if I knew what year it was, and if I could tell the court the name of the current president. I looked at him with absolute pity. I leaned into the microphone and stated that I was in the King County Family Court, Department 4. I announced that the presiding official was the Honourable Judge Miller, that today was Friday the 14th of November, and that we were here because my son filed a fraudulent petition under State Statute Chapter 11, Section 130, attempting to strip me of my civil liberties. I politely asked the lawyer if he would like me to recite the rest of the legal code, or if he would prefer I count backward from 100 in French to further demonstrate my cognitive function. The lawyer blinked rapidly, completely thrown off guard by my sharp, articulate response. He looked back at Travis, clearly panicked, before muttering that he had no further questions and scurrying back to his table. Then Mr. Sterling stood up. He approached the bench with a thick, heavy, leather-bound folder. He addressed the judge, his voice echoing powerfully off the high ceilings. He stated that the petitioner had submitted a highly questionable medical report from a single private physician, claiming I suffered from severe and irreversible dementia. He asked to enter into evidence exhibits A, B, and C. Mr. Sterling handed the heavy folders to the bailiff, who passed them up to the judge. He explained that these were 3 comprehensive, independent psychiatric and cognitive evaluations conducted over the past 48 hours. They were performed by the chief of neurology at the state hospital, the leading geriatric psychiatrist in Seattle, and an independent court-appointed medical examiner. Mr. Sterling announced that all 3 doctors had certified under penalty of perjury that Vivian Hayes possessed extraordinary mental clarity. They put me through hours of rigorous testing, and my cognitive function tested in the 99th percentile for my age group. I was completely, utterly, and undeniably competent to manage my own medical and financial affairs. Furthermore, he noted that the doctors concluded my suspicion of financial abuse by my son was not a paranoid delusion, but a highly logical conclusion based on concrete, verifiable evidence. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. I watched the color drain completely out of Travis' face. He looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with sudden, suffocating panic. Chloe gripped the edge of her wooden table, her knuckles turning bone white, her perfectly painted lips parted in silent horror. Judge Miller flipped through the thick medical reports, reading the signatures of the most respected medical professionals in the state. Her expression hardened from professional neutrality to absolute fury. She glared down at Travis over the rim of her glasses, but Mr. Sterling was not even close to being done. Now that my sanity was established as an undeniable legal fact, it was time to tear my son's stolen world down to the studs. Mr. Sterling raised his voice, cutting through the murmurs like a steel blade. He told the court that now that my competence was proven, we had to address the true, sinister motive behind this fraudulent petition. He declared that Travis Hayes did not file for emergency guardianship out of concern for his aging mother. He filed it to cover up a multi-million-dollar federal crime. Mr. Sterling pulled another massive stack of documents from his briefcase. He walked over to the projector screen so everyone in the gallery could see clearly. First, he displayed the quitclaim deed to my duplex. He explained that this document transferred my paid-off home directly to a private luxury event company owned entirely by Chloe Hayes. He announced that the signature on the deed was a blatant forgery and that we had sworn testimony from a forensic handwriting expert confirming the fraud. Travis Hayes stole his mother home while she was bedridden with pneumonia, and then he used the threat of this very courtroom to kick her out onto the street. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. But Sterling kept pushing. He pulled out the massive stack of bank statements I had retrieved from the manager. He projected the international wire transfers for the entire courtroom to see, highlighting the massive figures in bright yellow marker. Mr. Sterling announced with righteous anger that for the past 5 years, Colin and Bradley Hayes, the older brothers of the petitioner, had sent over $4 million in corporate dividends to support their mother. He explained how Travis Hayes intercepted every single penny. He funneled the money out of a joint checking account, washed it through offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and finally deposited the stolen millions into high-yield private portfolios listed strictly under his and his wife's names. I sat in the witness box and watched my youngest son completely unravel. Travis was shaking violently. He tugged at his expensive silk tie as if he could no longer breathe. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of lie or excuse, but no sound came out. Chloe was quietly sobbing, sliding down in her chair as if she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Then came the moment that shattered my heart and healed it all at once. Mr. Sterling reached into his briefcase and pulled out the large plastic evidence bag containing the intercepted mail I had found in the storage unit. He held up a letter written on thick, expensive paper. He told the judge that Travis Hayes not only stole his mother money and her home, but he also stole her family. He explained how Travis convinced his older brothers that their mother hated them and refused to accept their money, while simultaneously convincing his mother that her sons had abandoned her in her old age to build their corporate empire. Mr. Sterling unfolded the paper and read a portion of Colin's letter out loud. He read the words where Colin said they were incredibly confused because Travis told them I threw away the plane tickets they sent for my birthday. He read the part where my oldest son begged to know what they did wrong, telling me they loved me, they missed me, and they just wanted me to meet my new granddaughter. I turned my head and looked straight into the gallery. Colin and Bradley were sitting side by side in the second row. They were no longer the stoic, powerful billionaires who had walked right past me at the gala. They were completely and utterly broken. Colin had his face buried in his hands, hot tears streaming down his face, his broad chest heaving with deep, ragged sobs. Bradley was gripping the wooden bench in front of him so hard the wood looked ready to snap. He was staring at Travis with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred and profound horror. In that single devastating moment, the truth washed over them. They finally realized that the mother they thought had cruelly rejected them had actually been isolated, robbed, and framed by the very brother they trusted to protect her. They realized that every cold word they thought I had said was a script written by Travis. I caught Colin's eye across the courtroom. I offered him a small, trembling smile, a silent promise that I was still here, and I still loved them. Bradley could not contain his rage a second longer. He stood up right there in the middle of the courtroom, pointing a shaking finger at Travis. He screamed that Travis was an absolute monster. He yelled that Travis told them I threw away their letters and never wanted to see them again. He accused his brother of stealing my life while smiling to their faces. The courtroom erupted into total chaos. The judge slammed her heavy wooden gavel down onto her desk. The sharp cracks echoed like gunshots. She roared for order in her court. The room instantly fell into a terrified pin-drop silence. The judge looked down at the massive pile of irrefutable evidence Mr. Sterling had laid before her. She looked at the forged property deed, the offshore bank routing numbers, the heartbreaking intercepted letters, and the pristine psychiatric evaluations, proving my absolute sanity. Her eyes locked onto Travis and Chloe. Her face was a mask of absolute judicial wrath. She addressed Travis Hayes, her voice shaking with absolute disgust. She stated that in all her years sitting on the bench, she had never seen a more despicable, calculated, and malicious the abuse of the legal system. She told him he attempted to weaponize the family court, to strip his own mother of her fundamental human rights, simply to cover up his own massive financial crimes. She condemned him for trying to lock an innocent, perfectly sane woman in a psychiatric facility to protect his stolen wealth. The judge did not hesitate for another second. She looked over at the two armed court bailiffs standing near the heavy oak doors. She pointed directly at the petitioner table. She declared loudly that she was denying the petition for emergency guardianship with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, based on the irrefutable evidence of forgery, grand larceny perjury, and severe elder abuse presented in her courtroom, she announced she was issuing an immediate bench warrant for the arrest of Travis Hayes and Chloe Hayes. She ordered the officers to take them into custody right now. The sound of the heavy metal handcuffs clicking securely around Travis' wrists echoed through the silent courtroom like a ringing bell of absolute justice. For 5 long years, he had treated me like I was invisible, a burden to be discarded, a nuisance to be robbed and silenced. Now he looked like nothing more than a terrified little boy. The swagger and the arrogance were completely gone. They were instantly replaced by the pale, trembling realization that his life of stolen luxury was officially over. Chloe did not fare any better. The moment the court bailiff grabbed her arm, she lost her mind. The perfectly manicured sweet daughter-in-law vanished into thin air. She screamed at the top of her lungs, physically fighting against the officer, and immediately pointed a shaking finger right at her husband. She cried out to the judge that it was all Travis' idea, that he forced her to sign the corporate papers, that she knew absolutely nothing about the stolen money or the forged deed to my home. She threw the man she supposedly loved straight under the bus without a single second of hesitation. But Mr. Sterling just smiled calmly from his seat. He had already provided the federal agents with the meticulous paper trail that proved Chloe was the sole active proprietor of the shell company that received my stolen duplex. The financial evidence incriminated them both equally. There was absolutely no escape for either of them. I watched them being marched out the heavy oak doors of the courtroom in shame. I felt no pity. I felt no regret. I only felt the clean, sharp air of freedom entering my lungs for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Later that very same afternoon, the federal agents moved in with swift and devastating precision. They raided the massive modern estate Travis and Chloe had built with my stolen money. They seized the pristine luxury vehicles straight from the driveway. They froze every single offshore bank account and domestic asset to ensure every stolen dime would be paid back in full restitution. The empire of lies Travis had carefully built had collapsed into absolute dust in a matter of hours. As the courtroom slowly cleared out, I remained seated at the defense table. I heard slow, heavy footsteps approaching from behind. I turned around and saw my 2 oldest sons standing there. Colin and Bradley looked completely shattered. The confident, untouchable billionaires I had seen at the corporate gala were completely gone. In their place were 2 men broken by the horrific realizations of what their own brother had done. Colin fell to his knees right there on the hard courtroom floor. He buried his face in his hands and wept with a raw, agonizing sorrow that tore at my heart. Bradley stood beside him, tears streaming down his face, his voice cracking as he begged for my forgiveness. Mum Bradley whispered, his voice thick with profound shame. "We did not know. I swear to you on my life, we did not know. Travis told us you hated us. He told us you threw our letters in the trash because you blamed us for leaving Seattle. He said you refused to see us or speak to us." Colin looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen with tears. At the gala, he said between heavy sobs, "Travis told us you were having a severe dementia episode. He said you were volatile and confused, and that approaching you would only trigger a violent panic attack. He begged us to keep our distance for your own safety. We thought we were protecting you by staying away. We thought you did not want us anymore. We are so incredibly sorry." I looked at my boys, the sons I had raised with so much love and relentless sacrifice. I saw the genuine agony in their eyes. Travis had manipulated their love and their concern, turning it into a weapon to isolate me. He had stolen 5 years of our lives together. I reached out and placed my hands on their cheeks, wiping away their tears, just as I had done when they were children with scraped knees. I told them to stand up. I did not yell. I did not accuse. I simply pulled them into my arms and held them tight. For the first time in 5 long years, my family was finally together, and the heavy wall of lies that had separated us was gone forever. I forgave my older sons that day in the courtroom, but I also made it perfectly clear that forgiveness does not mean instant reconciliation. I looked Colin and Bradley in the eyes and set firm, unbreakable boundaries. I told them that while I understood Travis had ruthlessly deceived them, they had still allowed themselves to be easily manipulated. They had let their busy corporate lives and the physical distance blind them to the reality of their own mother suffering. I told them that trust is a bridge that must be rebuilt, brick by brick, day by day, and it could not simply be bought with tearful apologies or expensive gifts. They accepted my strict terms without a single moment of hesitation. They promised to spend the rest of their lives proving their love and loyalty to me. And they started by calling their families in Europe, right there in the hallway, booking flights for my daughters-in-law and my grandchildren to finally come visit their grandmother in Seattle. With the truth finally out in the open and my mind legally certified as sharp and highly capable, I officially activated my 15% corporate voting block. Mr. Sterling walked into the next executive board meeting of their international tech empire right by my side. I did not just take a quiet back seat in the room. I took my rightful place at the head of the massive mahogany table. With my corporate equity fully secured and the stolen funds recovered from the total seizure of Travis assets, my personal wealth was immense. I was no longer a struggling homeless widow counting pennies to pay for basic groceries. I was a multi-millionaire businesswoman, but I knew exactly what I wanted to do with that newfound power. I did not buy a sprawling, cold, modern mansion like the one Travis had built. Instead, I bought a beautiful, warm, welcoming estate nestled in the quiet, green countryside just outside the city limits. It has a massive wrap-around wooden porch, a huge garden filled with vibrant, blooming flowers, and plenty of spacious guest rooms for when my grandchildren come to visit from Europe. But the most important thing I built was not a physical house. I took a massive portion of my recovered financial funds and partnered directly with Mr. Sterling to establish the Vivian Hayes Legal Defense Foundation. We built a powerful organization entirely dedicated to providing top-tier legal, financial, and psychological support for elderly individuals who are facing financial and emotional abuse from their own greedy family members. We hire the best corporate lawyers, the best private investigators, and the best medical doctors to ensure that no mother or father ever has to feel as helpless, terrified, and isolated as I once did. Today, my life is a beautiful testament to survival and unyielding resilience. It has been 2 years since that terrifying night, shivering in the freezing rain, and my world is completely transformed. Colin and Bradley visit me every single month without fail. My house is constantly filled with the joyful, ringing laughter of my grandchildren running through the bright halls. Travis and Chloe are serving long, difficult sentences in a federal prison, facing the harsh and permanent reality of the criminal choices they made out of pure, unadulterated greed. I never visit them. I never write to them. Some bridges, once burned to ashes by betrayal, are simply not meant to be rebuilt. This morning, I woke up early just as the sky was turning a soft pink. I walked out onto my beautiful wooden porch, wrapped in a thick, comfortable sweater. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rolling hills, casting a warm, golden glow across my flourishing garden. The birds were singing their sweet morning songs in the tall oak trees. I held a warm mug of fresh coffee in my hands, breathing in the crisp, clean morning air. I looked out at the peaceful horizon and took a slow, deep sip. I am no longer a victim. I am no longer a discarded burden or an invisible old woman. I am a survivor, a fierce protector, and a woman who took back her power against all odds. I am Vivian Hayes, and for the first time in a very long time, I am completely at peace and entirely in control of my own magnificent destiny. If you enjoyed my story, please consider supporting me by liking this video and subscribing to my channel so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please share your opinions with me in the comments below. Let me know what city or country you are listening from today. There are many more incredible life stories waiting for you on my channel. Thank you so much for your sweet support. And until next time, take care of yourselves and hold your loved ones close.